Shashi Tharoor ji.
Madam, question number 341.
Question is laid on the table of the House.
Madam Speaker,
Yes.
I must admit that I've been a bit surprised by the response of the Honourable Minister, my good friend, for whom I have a great deal of respect, that he takes satisfaction in his answer from the fact that, according to a survey report of Transparency International, India has gone up, he says, to 76th most efficient civil service in the world. Now, I'm sure that this is not the benchmark that the Honourable Minister or myself or indeed his Prime Minister would wish to hold India to. We would certainly want to be a country that aspires not to be proud of being 76th in anything in the world. So I do want to stress, Madam Speaker, that the Minister going on thereafter to cite the Administrative Reforms Commission, but then to say there is no proposal to study the feasibility of lateral entry. When you look at the international benchmarks that are available, when you see what other countries' governments do in terms of ensuring that they not only bring in fresh blood into the government at various levels, including some very high levels, but they also renew the competence, the spirit of the hard-working bureaucrats. And I'm not criticizing the quality of our bureaucrats, but the big enemy of bureaucracy is complacency. We know that. We need them to be able to rejuvenate themselves through working even in the private sector, and therefore I would ask the Minister, instead of saying blandly there is no proposal, I am making the proposal in Parliament. Can you please, I request you to constitute a committee to look at the best practices in other countries' civil services and see why we can't be the best, rather than the Minister being satisfied with being number 76. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Speaker, ma'am, Honourable Member is a scholar in his own right, a very erudite and well-read person, and I can hardly disagree with any of the points raised by him. Having said that, just to put the record straight, never and nowhere in the answer it was mentioned that we are satisfied with number 76. The question is, why not number 1? And therefore, this is no way reflection of satisfaction. The only reference of this Transparency International was brought in just to cite that the Honourable Member had very rightly pointed out to a report called Political and Economic Risk Consultancy Limited report, where he rightly mentioned that the level of the Indian bureaucracy efficiency was rated very low. Yeah. When we try to study this report, of course this report is a very recent one. It was conducted by a private agency on a limited survey of about 600 sample, out of whom just about 500 or 600 were from India. The idea was to just to bring to the notice of the Honourable Member and the other members that we are always open to receive inputs, but there are a number of other reports as well. Some of them may be a little more credible, like Transparency International, which on the other hand says that in 2 years we have jumped 14 ranks. On the other hand, we have World Bank report which says we have jumped 20 ranks from 140 in 2014 to 130 in 2012. Now, I am not saying that two wrongs make one right or that we should not jump to number 1. What I am just trying to humbly state is that there has been a progressive improvement even in the statistical ranking if we go by the different reports. That does not also mean that we should lose cognizance of the report which has been cited by the Honourable Member. I also agree with the Honourable Member that we can follow the best practices, but for that we should also have a political consensus. And across the party lines, I think every one of us agrees that we should contribute our bit to improved governance. The Honourable Prime Minister, soon after the formation of the government, gave us the mantra of maximum governance. And in the last 2 years, a number of such decisions were taken to ensure that every officer is able to perform to the best of his ability, able to perform to the best of his potential, and able to exercise his initiative. To cite just a few of them, the Prevention of Corruption Act, which is envisaged to be brought in, encompasses certain provisions to streamline the Corruption Act and also provide safeguards to these officers. We have modified the transfer policy as well. We have also modified the suspension rules of the civil servants working in the states. Now, coming to the other point, because 2-3 questions have been raised by the Honourable Member, and very rightly so, about the committee being formed, which he says. The proposal from his is welcome. We are always open to inputs. But I might just point out that over the last 10 years or so, even before this government came in, there has been a continuous process going on and deliberations going on in this direction. For example, the 6th Pay Commission in 2007 came out with certain recommendations, which included about the perks and the emoluments and the salary to be provided to a person engaging himself in lateral entry from one government department to the other or being hired. Similarly, the then government also had constituted or initiated a process of preparing guidelines in 2005. In 2011, the DOPT put forward these guidelines, and the then government in 2013 constituted a group of ministers under the then defense minister. And then the deliberations were done, a report was brought in, the then PMO was also taken into cognizance, and the then government decided that the issue is to be deferred. We have again taken it up. We are in the process of gathering inputs, and whatever inputs come to us. But I fully agree with the honourable member when he says that you should encourage entry at the younger level. But I am sure he would also cooperate with us in dealing with the dilemma of this IAS qualification age or eligibility age being increased from time to time, which has been happening even before this government came in. And we sometimes happen from certain political sections. I don't know whether the House is aware that the last cutoff for appearing for civil services today is 47 years. And at 50 years, you are eligible for retirement. And it has happened from time to time. Yes. On certain considerations which are extraneous to the merit of the issue as such. So if all of us evolve a consensus and go back to the criteria laid down by the IAS, which was inherited from the ICS, where we had entry only 27 or 28 years maximum, I think the issue would be addressed, which is being referred to by the honourable member.
Thank you.
Madam Speaker, I thank the Minister for his response, and I hope this committee will be set up, because when he speaks about a political consensus, it can only follow from a recommendation by the government. Then we can see whether the other parties will agree. But coming to my supplementary question, Madam, especially since the Prime Minister is also here, we have now in recent days had 2 examples of severe shortages of staff in the government. My committee, the Standing Committee on External Affairs, has identified the IFS cadre as one of the smallest in the world for one of the biggest countries. 140 posts out of just 912 are lying vacant in the Ministry of External Affairs. Yesterday, Madam Speaker, you remember the Minister of Culture stood up here and confessed that of his 15,000 sanctioned posts, only 10,000 are filled. He has 5,000 vacancies. So my question to the Prime Minister and to the Honourable Minister in the Prime Minister's office is, he has mentioned there is an Administrative Reforms Commission. But if he has read the report of the last Administrative Reforms Commission, I have it with me, it says the Commission is of the view that lateral entry should be done even up to the level of additional secretary, which is a leadership position from which one can aspire to reach the Secretary of Government. So the Administrative Reforms Commission has also recommended lateral entry. Various standing committees have done so. The idea is bring in blood from the private sector, the academic sector, the NGO sector, the universities. Let us have people who will inject new life into our bureaucracy, and we will get better results. We won't have to worry about being 76th. But the important point is, at least as a mechanism for filling vacancies in this government, which has the highest record of vacancies across all ministries and across the judiciary, can you please consider lateral entry? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, I think part of what has been raised by Honourable Member has already been actually answered by him, and there is no conflict of opinion as far as that is concerned. He is right that in certain filling up of certain senior posts, you have sometimes constraints. But I think that goes back to the earlier question, because you don't have entries in a sufficient number at the lower level. And you would agree, because the honourable member is better informed on the issue than me, that as in the hierarchy you proceed, it's like a pyramid. So by the time you become an additional secretary or a secretary, you are hardly having 1 year or 6 months of posting left. There are certain posts which require a minimum tenure of 2 years. That is why the Government of India has certain posts, like, for example, the post of Home Secretary, Defence Secretary, Foreign Secretary, Cabinet Secretary, who have a 2-year term. Now, this constraint can be addressed at the fundamental level, and that is why I referred to the consensus on this issue, because otherwise we would keep having, because there is a certain mechanism in level. You cannot have a lateral entry unless you have put in 9 years of service. Then after you have put in 9 years, then you can have at one stage 3 years, extendable to 5 years maximum in your entire career. And then again you have a cooling off period for 3 years. Now cooling off period for 3 years for a person who just has 2 years left for retirement becomes a constraint. Yes. So these are certain fundamental issues. That is why I agree with him. The Administrative Reforms Committee suggested, and we agreed, that as far as the additional secretary is concerned, the cooling off would be just 1 year. Because he wouldn't have left much of that. Maybe he may not be left within 1 year. So it requires to be addressed at the fundamental level. And I'm sure all of us together would sort out this.
Thank you.
And as far as the recruitment is concerned, certainly about 1,742 recruitments had been made in the last 1 year. The process of recruitment has certainly increased. We have now a mechanism which is much more expeditious. And we have also tried to bring in transparency, try to bring in ease. Like, for example, under the guidance of Honorable Prime Minister, from the 1st of January this year, we have abolished interviews for the lower posts, particularly C and D. That not only brings more impartiality, it gives a level playing field for all the youth, and at the same time, it also cuts down on the huge expenditure and wastage of time which went on in conducting interviews. For every post nowadays, you have thousands of candidates applying. So this is just one example. We are already moving in that direction.
Okay. Kirit Somayaji.